Hi everyone, welcome on Unofficial. My name is Oleg Sapishchuk.
And I am Peter Schmalfeldt.
Today we are going to have amazing discussion about apps on Commerce Cloud. And for this discussion, we invited more amazing guest, Matt Hudson. Hi Matt, how are you?
What's up, guys? How you doing? Excited to talk to you today.
Thank you a lot for coming to us today. I mean, for the past year, we had a lot of discussions in terms of related themes, right? We talked about about the DevOps, and there was agility, and we also talked about the apps and those headless architecture. I don't know if you actually can call apps as well like a headless, because you kind of separate, right? Kind of a logic, maybe. Let's see. Let's discuss it today as well. We talked about headless and PWA. So I guess maybe could be very interesting discussion in terms of apps vs PWA. I hope we can cover it today. But in general, like before we come into the apps on the commerce, can you just tell us about yourself? Like, what's you doing for life? Like, what's your interests? How actually you came, I don't know, in the world of Salesforce Commerce Cloud?
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. There's a lot of good stories in here, but I'll make it quick. I started my journey in software engineering when I was 12, which is now 30 years ago, which is crazy. I actually turned 42 yesterday, so exactly 30 years. I always wanted to build things, and so I started programming, Turbo Pascal, moved into PHP and other ones, and eventually I sold my first website. I called my dad. I said, "Dad, how much do I charge this doctor?" And he said, "Charge him what you want." Well, I needed rent. He paid me my invoice and my rent. And I said, "I'm going to do this for my life." That led me into mobile apps. And then 7 years ago, I started working at Belk on their mobile web and their mobile app solutions. They transitioned to Demandware right before they were bought by Salesforce, which provided enormous amounts of learnings during the transitionary period. And I fully took over the app 4 years ago, the Belk app. And then I've been building frameworks and architecting, other apps since then, mostly on Commerce Cloud, but other apps as well.
Cool. And for me, like who living outside of US, and what's Belk app is doing? Like what's features
good question. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing. You mentioned my interests. I cannot forget to mention my 2 daughters and my wife. My 2 daughters and my whole world. So outside of my work, I love my work. Those daughters are my main interest outside of just making things great. But in regard to Belk, the Belk app has really killed it in the last 4 years, and I mean destroyed it. We did that a lot of ways, and I can't wait to talk about them, especially on the technical side, but also on the marketing side, and even pounding the ground and integrating with stores and doing a truly omni-channel experience, which is an old buzzword that I feel like half people don't implement correctly. But yeah, I'm excited about the future. I'm excited to talk about headless. I'm excited to talk about mobile in general and mobile app and the differences and the architecture of them.
Cool. So Matt, just a question, like 4 years back when you said you took over the mobile app. So why you guys decided to move with mobile apps? Why didn't decided to maybe switch to PWA, go with web, like have just web experience and go with that one? If you go with mobile app, right, you potentially, then you have 2 teams. One will go with web, one will go with mobile app. Then you have to manage all those maybe dependent releases. Then it's one user experience, potentially. Maybe you have one design team. Like, why you went with that complexity?
Yeah.
Like, what
that's
are
a great
the benefits that you're getting?
I first of all, I want to unwrap every piece of that question, because I think the team question is an important part. The design question is an important part. But I'm going to get right to the heart of it. And I got to be honest, this is somewhere I think a lot of engineers actually miss. And I'm anxious to hear Peter's thoughts on it. But I've been around the block on this many times. But ultimately, we wanted to be where the customer was. Now, Belk already had an app. We had a very forward-thinking SVP at the time named Ivy Chin, who I think enormous amounts of and has been a leader in NRF and others. And she really understood that fashion and women in our market wanted to be on mobile app. And if you think about what Amazon has done on app and Starbucks, they've created a situation where your best and most premium customers are on app. And so we got lucky that we had a visionary leader. Now, that does not mean that we didn't want to do PWA. At the time, when I initially took over, MoveWeb was a big thing, and sort of having a layer on top, which is not my favorite architecture, of course. So PWA was less of an issue, right? 6-7 years ago when I first started in mobile and when they built the initial app. But once we moved to Commerce Cloud, SFRA wasn't quite there yet. And PWA wasn't really mature. iOS hadn't fully released service workers and some of those other things that have enabled it. But there is another piece, which is that if your customer wants mobile app, and I'm searching for the Belk app, $4 billion retailer in the App Store, and you don't have an app, that's not omni-channel. How can that be considered omni-channel? If I'm making my customer log in every 30 minutes because the token limitations on Commerce Cloud, that's not the best experience. I'm sitting in my daughter, when my daughter was born, I was QAing the mobile web, mobile app on my phone, and I'm rocking her, right? And this is common among people that are parents or busy schedules. And I realized something while I was QAing that mobile app. If I couldn't check out with one thumb while my baby's crying, my checkout's not good enough. It's not fast enough. If I got to log in and I forgot my password, not good enough. And mobile app, honestly, or a really killer PWA, don't get me wrong, it can be done. But mobile app provides the best way to do that. And it's the fastest, the one that you don't have to log in every time. Again, a lot of it is dependent upon who is building your mobile app. PWA, though, is important too. The mobile team at Belk was surprised when I said, hell yeah, we have to do PWA. You know why? Because a significant portion of your customers, 30-40%, you got to give them the fastest experience too. If you're going to give your customer what they want the best everywhere. Desktop, mobile web, in the store, on app. They don't care where it is, man. On social, you can't just leave one channel out just because you think one is slightly better alternative or slightly worse alternative or much cheaper. You got to be where your customer is.
So, Matt, I'm curious about something. So you and I talked before a show about like our backgrounds in mobile, and the old architectures that we had were like PhoneGap and Cordova and whatnot. Right. So, they had a good solution for people who wanted to make web apps. And this is like your point. They didn't have progressive web apps back then. Yeah. And so you didn't really have the ability to make a mobile web that was also could be converted to a native app. So when you now are in that position where you have a progressive web app and then you have a native app, are you my vocabulary when I say mobile app, I consider like a progressive web app to be a mobile app. Native app being like actually something.
App.js, it's all app.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like if you're able to share, like when you're working with the Belk app, are you incorporating parts of your progressive web app into like basically some sort of container, or is it completely a custom build for each platform?
So we do have service workers, and they're pretty good, but I'd say we're very in the beginning stages of the optimizations around PWA, right? And I've been wanting to do it for a really long time, and they're on the journey, but it takes time. And again, it takes a really good team to do it well. I don't want to do, a mediocre PWA experience, and just because I put in service workers, call it a PWA, right? Like I want it to feel really good. I want to do a great job with it, not just a mediocre one. So I think that's a big part of it, and you got to set the baseline for it, implementing SFRA, getting off of some of the other older Commerce Cloud pieces that the legacy systems have is challenging. But as far as the architecture goes, currently it is, when we first got started, it was fully native, except things that required compliance. So PCI compliance, we obviously left web for that because, going through PCI just to support mobile app payment methods didn't make that much sense, especially customers don't necessarily put their payment instruments in from app. They're usually doing a lot of the work on mobile or on desktop and then coming to app or coming from app to mobile web. They want both. If they want to do a lot of typing, they're hitting it desktop at night. If they're at Starbucks and they remember, oh man, that sale is coming or that 20% push notification is coming, they buy right there. So the customer doesn't think of you as PWA. They don't give a I don't know if I can say that word, but they don't care about PWA or responsive. They just want it to work, and they want it to be fast, and they want it to work on 3G, 5G, Wi-Fi at your house, at your sister's house, everybody's house. And that's the most important thing to be thinking about. How do you give the customer the best experience? So as far as the architecture now, though, we have switched over to React Native, which has allowed the team a similar skill set across all, but a fully native experience on the app itself. But we still use WebView for like order details, things that change a lot, or like I said, the compliance thing. And look, mobile web can be done well enough that you can barely tell. Nordstrom has several web views in their app, and honestly, you can barely tell. However, they're one of the few that you can barely tell, and I think they have a very ace team. I don't know them, but they have an ace team doing a really killer job making it look great.
Yeah, Matt, the exact reason I asked that is because I think there's a debate about whether or not you can actually make a web app actually feel like a native app, and yeah, it depends on your skill of your team and how close it can be done. So that was one of the other questions that was related to this. I think was the considerations that have to go into planning a team around this, because obviously there's some overlap of skills. Like you brought up with React, and then anyone who's starting this out would need to make that decision if they're making a progressive web app. What can be partitioned out to some teams, and then what needs to be spread out across like who can be. So I'm curious how like internally how you guys handle that within your corporation, like as far as planning that. Yeah,
the key to that question is the team. And this is underappreciated, I think, out there in the community because there are not Commerce Cloud developers hanging off of trees. There are not React Native, React developers out there just available for $20 an hour. And sure, there's plenty of developers out there, good developers, great developers. There's a lot of variance between them. The makeup of your team, if it's with an agency, if it is with a consultancy, if it's an in-house team, what is the combination? If you're looking to go to React, though, no question, the brilliance of React, and by the way, I've never said that about any other cross-platform hybrid solution, and I don't consider React hybrid, actually. I consider it to be just cross-platform, and those are different things, even though people call them hybrid. It's not about HTML. It's just the same language, rendering it natively, right? And that's the brilliance of it, though. It's one tool chain. It's one VS Code or WebStorm or whatever it is that you like, and one language that you're writing in. So your Commerce Cloud team is writing in React with controllers, or if they're doing PWA, they're using React. I'm sorry, not React with controllers, but JavaScript with your controllers, or React on the front end, with SFRA or whatever it is. And then if you're React Native team, you're using the same tools. And it's a lot different segue into mobile app than going directly to Java, Kotlin, Swift, or Objective-C. I was an Objective-C developer forever. I actually really like it, even though a lot of people hate it. For years, I was a compiler guy, and I'm still a type guy. I'm still a strongly typed guy. But my brother was always on the Jedi side over here telling me JavaScript was going to take over the world. And I was like, no, you have to have a compiler. And now I've gotten in a situation where I'm like, well, now I'm a React guy. I'm like strongly typed, but JavaScript, it's fast. No compiler, it's fast. All I care about is that it's really fast and I can find great engineers. So I think the team question is an important one. If you've got a legacy team, yeah, you might decide to just continue along, improve as you move into React and move into PWA and move into bigger architectures. Yeah, if you're moving to mobile app, I think there's no reason not to use React Native. But it's got to be a native solution for the speed and performance parts for my money.
For the native solution, Matt, you in the beginning when you talked about the challenges, you talked about when customer will be logged out after 30 minutes. Yeah. I guess you're referring to that Okapi limitation, right? That
the token
for 30 minutes. I'm just wondering for the audience. I guess whoever will build mobile apps, he will get the same challenge, right?
Yeah.
And I know that Slash,
how do you do it?
Yeah, okay, exactly. How you did it on that time and how you do it right now. Because, for example, I personally right now had to do the same brainstorm few weeks back, and I found that Slash could be a very good solution. But I just wondered what you did actually on your side.
So on mobile, what we do, and this is how I even approach sensitive questions. If it is private on the device, it's private. It's one place that information can be accessed. So what we do is you keep the token locally and you refresh it locally. If it runs out and expires, just like Facebook or any others does, you just refresh it. OCAPIs have refresh. It's easy money. However, the key to that is that the credentials, the sensitive information has got to be kept only on device in the encrypted keychain, right? You're relying upon Apple and you're requiring on the device. But here's the thing, that's physical security. Nobody's going to come steal your phone. It's not on your servers. So you don't have to, you shouldn't say, obviously you have to be concerned about it, but you created a barrier, a huge barrier, where only that physical device stores any sensitive information. Well, that's a huge win. That app is sandboxed. No other apps can access it. And that's not true for mobile web. That's really the problem with cookies. And we're seeing it across privacy information now. Cookies, because they're on device but accessible by everybody, Google wants to privatize them or make it to where only certain people can access it. Yeah, I mean, that's why cookies are a problem. You have to press accept all cookies on every mobile website, which, by the way, I hate. But you don't have to do that in app because it's sandbox. Because I think Apple and Google thought about these things ahead of time. I really do. I think they were brilliant in the way that they organized it. So
when you say about the saving, do you also save some other data, like on device for the performance? Like if I think about the caching, like, okay, fine. I can build the caching on like server, like on SFCC level, right? On app level, like to not hit the database layer. Then I can also use the CDN to cache some information over there. If you have a BFF in your architecture, you can also maybe cache some information in BFF layer. But then I'm wondering, like, how much information it actually makes sense to store on the local app itself, and what benefits then it will bring to the users?
So it's a great question. And I can tell you, somebody had said something about, I think you guys had a podcast with, I forgot who it was, but stretching the limits of Commerce Cloud. And I can tell you that I have personally stretched the limits of Commerce Cloud many times, with many millions of SKUs and 500 promotions. And I can tell you that, once you start doing heavy processing or hitting the database, and if you're not in the ORM layer, so point is, we have many layers of caching, right? Whether it's on the edge or in Commerce Cloud or ORM or whatever, right? All of those, every bit of caching that you can possibly do, we are doing it. And I think that that's just good architecture. As far as your question about what is stored locally, well, and what's the benefit? The first thing is startup time. It's undervalued in app world, but the app has got to start up fast. The biggest benefit of app is performance. You've pre-downloaded, and this is true for PWA too, but you've pre-downloaded the skeleton, right? It's like the old Backbone days where you download the Backbone and then hydrate it. App is like that, except it's basically keeping everything and it's done on the initial download. So the start time is one, right? Keeping everything where it's a pool scenario where I show what is cached locally, and not even like in the browser, but like cached directly as in Redux, which again is true for the web as well. And then when it gets updated, the beauty of React is as soon as it comes back, boom, my UI is updated. And so it feels very fast. So as a, at a high level, it's hard to think of that as faster. It's kind of like, oh, well, you're rendering it faster, but you're kind of tricking the customer. But doesn't really matter. It feels much faster. It's reactive. It moves around. I never block the UI. Again, all important pieces of an app that are a part of the way Apple and Google and even the React team, were thinking about it. But those kind of things make it much faster. As an example, mobile app has tab bar. So on tab bar, I literally preload and pre-render in memory all 5 tabs. So when I switch from tab to tab on an app, it's super fast. Even in a PWA case, I have to specifically, explicitly as an engineer, go out and pre-download each one of those pages, pre-render them. If I'm smart, I've got server-side rendering. Again, that's all stuff that's basically packed into native. So now, once PWA has server-side rendering and we get device-side rendering and all these other beautiful things, man, yeah, probably there won't be an app store, but I think we're a long ways away from that. But so performance is what it's about for me.
Yeah, okay. So are you saying that PWA is for web experiences, just to make websites really faster. And then mobile is actually about the real new experiences for the customers, even that's also faster. Is it
I
right?
do not consider PWA to be a replacement for mobile app. I do not.
Okay.
I know that that's crazy to some people, but again, we talked about the login piece. The benefits of mobile app are around performance, the login, the sandboxing, the pre-rendering. Yes, it's a close substitute. It's good. I think everybody should have it. I think responsive is gone, right? Like we should all be doing PWA, in my opinion. But again, I think it takes time to get the engineers there and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't consider PWA to be a mobile app, but I do think everybody's got to have it because it's the best mobile web you can give.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I mean, the other issue with progressive web apps, right, is you got your initial manifest file that actually handles the what can be cached, what can't be cached, and then it's just the architecture wise, it's a lot different. Plus, you've got, besides, I mean, you have state management across both of those things, so that's fine. So you can populate data, but everything you said about actually hydrating stuff is hugely important because you on a mobile, actual, truly native mobile app, you've got a lot more capability to just like store stuff locally. Where hitting that back button, you could actually, instead of having to, even hydrate stuff, period, it's literally already re-rendered, like you said. So it's just kind of like a night and day difference. But and that translates to people's actually experience when they're using the app. That tactile feeling of hitting a back button and seeing what you just saw visibly there. There's also weird like performance related stuff you have to handle with progressive web apps, where like if you do hit a back button and the user had scrolled to a specific portion of a site, anyone who's worked on mobile apps knows this is like a big pain in the butt to get the user back to where they were after you've done like, scroll, load more, and then you have to take them back to the place where they were just at is like really hard to do apparently in progressive web apps, but on a native mobile apps, like, yeah, that's not a problem at all.
I mean, Apple and Google handled a lot of these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Framework, and you can't underestimate that.
Yeah, so that kind of like sensitivity from a regular user experience perspective, they're night and day differences. But I mean, there's definitely value for both instances. But yeah, I would agree with Matt that there's not. It's hard to compare them in this instance.
And by the way, I think it's important that with a great team, an excellent and modern team, almost all these things can be done in PWA. But again, it has to be explicitly done. Pre-rendering all 4 tabs. Tab bar does work, but then you got to deal with Safari and their little, now the address bar is at the bottom, and you're like, okay, why did we move it to the bottom? The interactions that Apple provides in Safari, or the changing of the WebView architecture, or stuff like that, and cross-browser compatibility. And I remember, I don't know why this one sticks out in my head, but I remember defer did not work on Internet Explorer in JavaScript many years ago, and we were doing a website for Hilton. This is before I was ever at Belk, and I remember I got reamed on the phone, like, why didn't it load on Internet Explorer? And it's like, and I had to tell this CEO, I was like, well, defer tag didn't work, like. And those problems don't exist as much on because Apple is always pushing updates, and Android is at least coming around on pushing updates. So
yeah. So one more thing, Matt, that I just remembered, like this new. It's not new. It's been out an issue for iOS for a while, but it's a new experience. The last time I talked to Oleg, and that is that an issue with progressive web apps, but just mobile web in general, like as far as web browsers go. Safari has an interesting bug where if you're on iOS 14 or on 15 and you've reverted back to the browser being on the bottom, they've reserved a 44 pixel area on their bottom, so that if you're scrolling and you've got a floating button there and you click in that space, it'll actually bring up the navigational element again. And so that's usually where in our space for, we have like the add to cart buttons or whatever is floating at the bottom. And so you get customer service reports saying I have to click on the button twice. So progressive web apps have to deal with that, of the actual web view itself being controlled by the vendor, in this case being Safari, and then with as far as like actual making your own apps, you can actually tweak those things under the hood a lot more, because you can configure that stuff on the native side when you're compiling everything, and to actually turn those flags on and off to make things a little bit more smoother if you needed to handle all that stuff. So
that's That is definitely a fun one, right?
Yeah, it's annoying, and a lot of people don't know that that's what's causing it, and they're just like, "Oh, and they have to test it a specific way to actually mimic it." It's a super annoying thing. But yeah, that's another. I kind of feel you on the mobile apps not being able to compare to.
Have you used Jira on Safari on mobile web? Right? They always say, "Oh, we don't support mobile," and I'm like, "Okay, kids, you support it like on 60% of the pages, just not the 3 there's bugs on." But one of the ones that was making me crazy for the longest time, because I'm always working, clicking on, Jira tickets and looking at them, trying to help the team. But in the bottom left, you couldn't click anything. This is the same one, right? I couldn't click my icon to log out or change workspaces. But I did find a trick, and I'm bringing this up because of this trick. But if you click the little AA on iPhone in the top left, you can actually stop the toolbar from hiding, and you can click those buttons. Little trick for you.
That's awesome.
Don't tell your customers, though. It won't help them. They'll be like, what? What do I do? I have no idea.
What's up, Oleg?
What's actually very funny for me right now that we spend more than half of our podcast discussing mobile apps and PWA about changes, all this stuff. And one more important stuff, that when anyone around the world talking about PWA and mobile apps and trying to discuss the difference, they say, oh, yeah, PWA don't support push notifications that much. And we didn't touch that topic at all. So does it really the main difference between those two? So what I'm trying to say is that around the world, no one were talking what you said, Matt, about reach your customer where he is. Like you are in the Starbucks, right? And you're trying to buy something. You want this touch bar, very fast experience. No one talking about this when they talk about the difference between PWA and mobile app. They just, I don't know why, but maybe people forget about this. Then, like I have a feeling that what we discussed today, like, and still discussing about right approaches, why you actually choosing mobile app, not actually discuss around the world. Like people talking about different other problems as the challenges between two of them, while we so far didn't even touch any of them. So why is that?
Well, probably because Peter and I are brilliant guys who worked in app for many years. I think they're nuanced, and even though I think customers inherently detect it, they can feel it. I had a boss, and she's a good friend of mine, and she was over the app when we were first kind of kicking it off. And, there were certain things, that she didn't love about it. But one day she came in, she goes, I still use mobile app instead of web. And I thought, why is that? She couldn't put her hand to, she made a lot of the decisions about what the UX looked like, what the UI looked like. And I just realized that it's kind of like the difference between iPhone and Android. Android drops frames because of you're not directly talking to the processor because they support all these different processors, right? But iPhone is very fast. It renders. I can scroll that thing as fast as I possibly want. So people detect those little things like dropping frames, even though they can never tell you that, right? Like it's a very small thing, but people do get it and they're attracted to it. So the push notifications, yeah, that's what's right in front of your face. And push is great. In the old days, we always talked about, oh, well, there's no access to the camera, right? Like I couldn't do a QR code scanner on the web. Well, now you can, even though a lot of people don't seem to do it. You totally could, even with the ubiquity of QR codes and stuff. Push notifications is important. Having the real estate on their phone that is directly clickable, like a shortcut, yes, I know it can be done, but the App Store is a channel. And that cannot be undersold. It's a channel that Apple and Google have made billions of dollars on. So, from the technology side, you've got these big rocks like push notifications and these things like hydration. But you have to have gone in there, done it, worked on a mature team, worked on a great engineering team to have figured those things out. They're very nuanced, even though we know it, not everybody on every team knows it, and senior leaders don't necessarily know it.
Okay. If we go back then to the technical discussion more, and when I think about not just mobile app, right? Mobile app is just one piece of that. What customers see, but behind the scene, you have multiple systems that support your landscape, right? 100%. In typical, let's say, Salesforce Commerce Cloud implementations, I would have my link cartridges that almost, let's say, comparably plug and play that I connect I can do with all the stuff. I can connect my service cloud. I can connect my marketing cloud. I can have all the systems, right? They are nicely connected together. But then when you bring headless, and in this particular case, mobile apps, how you then connect with all the other systems? Like, what you actually doing? Like, when you have kind of a debate, like, are you actually connecting from the mobile app directly to those systems? If I have to, for example, to track behavior, right? Let's say I want to track customer behavior. Do I want to send this activity to this like Commerce Cloud, and then Commerce Cloud will communicate to other systems? Or how you actually do it?
You ever, anybody ever tell you something that when they told it to you seemed so obvious, and you were like, why is this so obvious and I didn't know it? You know, like, it's not actually as hard as you think. So the Okapis are a pretty decent system. They have their problems. Don't get me wrong, speed, performance, the index, other things. But Okapis are pretty flexible. The way they were engineered to put hooks in is pretty decent. And what it allows us to do is take our cartridge code, our backend code, right, and any classes that we've created in JavaScript for the web, and basically utilize those classes. And as long as they're not really coupled to the front end, just like you talked about headless, you can call the same services that you call directly from your hooks. And so those hooks allow us to call tax services or payment services. All of your payment is set up for native checkout in the same way that it is for, excuse me, for your web checkout. We utilize the same code for the most part outside of the front end coupling in Okapi that we use for web. Now, a lot of times we have to duplicate it. We got to remove things like request session or request custom or, you know, the query string, which is not going to be there or whatever. But a lot of times we are just simply converting a Commerce Cloud URL into a deep link of some sort that talks to Okapi and outputs products from Okapi the same way the website does. It's really just the app should be considered a container. We talk about headless all the time. Well, app is just one more head. It's not different. And if you're in React, it's just a different, it might even be the same repo. I mean, you could have a mono repo with your React. Now, I don't really believe strongly in shared code because I think you actually end up creating more hassle than not. But if you got a really nice set of classes that do a lot of the logic, and then the front end is separated out smartly between iOS and Android and your mobile web, you can certainly have a lot of the same components, a lot of the same UI, a lot of the same pieces that are there, for the front end. Again, I personally am not big on trying to share code. I think that in e-commerce, we're moving so fast that you end up recycling more code than reusing. Unfortunately, it goes away from our dry principles and the Gang of Four principles that we've all learned over the years. But unfortunately, we're literally doing a project every month that redoes our payment methods or our PDP or our PLP, and we're adding features constantly. I mean, if you can't move fast, you're not getting anywhere. So anyway, long story short is Okapis can call all the same services. You just have to be smart about the way you build them. And if you're building classes and controllers, you just bring them into your hooks and output it as JSON instead of HTML. I'm oversimplifying it a little bit, but almost everything else is there. The login is there. The token is there. All of those things have been in there since at least v16.9 when I was using it a billion years ago.
It makes sense to me. I mean, I'm not sure about the full our audience, but the way how you told and how I understand it is like you have just to have a better code structure and that's it, right? So if I have a function that handles some business logic and I have inbound context like some data, it shouldn't be like, as you said, request other stuff. It should be more like abstract, like, okay, this is my customer information and this is my order information. Do with those two inbound entities some logic. Then I can expose this function to the storefront, maybe some middleware that will actually convert the request into the customer and into the order, right, into the context of the storefront that's running on the, let's say, SFRA. And the same would be with Okapi, with which you can also pass some parameters about the orders, about the customer. Then we can build this two entities and pass to that business logic function. So at some point, I mean, not at some point, fully point, I get you what you're saying, that we have just encapsulate that business logic in just a better way, and then we can reuse it for the headless, we can reuse it for the standard, like typical SFRA projects, for the heads like mobile, maybe even like, as you said, other heads. I can even expose it to maybe some POS with a copy, right? Like just have over there. This is great.
Yeah, Oleg,
idea. Go ahead, Peter.
For projects that I've built in the past, I mean, this is probably the same thing Matt's doing. There's usually like a route that's mapped to what they call a domain. And the domain is what handles all the data that's associated with the specific routes that you're going to. And those routes then are usually mapped to like copy type path. So everything that's kind of where you're getting your data is all coming back into something that's like the domain that handles that set of data. And then from there, you got, if you're doing like a similar MVC type framework, like you can like send that data out to whatever you want to render it or to store it into some like state management, whatever kind of stuff. So yeah,
most of what we're doing is not even that sophisticated, to tell you the truth. But if you think about it in a rudimentary but also fundamental way, which is that you're just passing around JavaScript, you're just passing around JSON, you're just passing around, everything in JavaScript is a function. So, I can grab functions and call them and output JSON, and then I'm just outputting it in the end in Okapi instead of in HTML. And as long as what you're passing around is either a Commerce Cloud object or a JSON object, for the most part, it can be processed in the hooks. And if it's in a decent format and not crazy typed, I can serialize it out to Okapi. And for the most part, almost everything that we do works that way. And the classes are pretty simple classes. They're just passing around an object and then doing something with it and serializing it or not, or whatever. And so it sounds oversimplified, but the truth is, as you mentioned, encapsulation and polymorphism are really the only two that are the most important. And, inheritance and classes and, things like that are challenging to really kind of, again, to move very fast with. But, look, as long as you're doing some of the basic blocking and tackling of decoupling the front ends, for the most part, the Okapis are just outputting JSON. In fact, the front end team, your web team, is often calling something like a controller to get JSON back anyway. I mean, a lot of times we use similar controllers to the front end in the mobile app, and something that I would say less sophisticated engineers understand is that REST APIs can have cookies too. So a lot of times they think, well, I can't do a cookie in the service. Well, yeah, you can. It's just in the header, dork. It's just not stored in the browser. It's the same thing. So a lot of times you can do a lot of the same things that you want to do. It's just kind of talking in a different way. As long as that front end is just a container, the back end, it should just be providing data. And it really is as simple as that, honestly.
Yeah, man, I think that to your point, a lot of this is just understanding how HTTP requests work, and the more I found that just the bulk of all of this conversation ends up being do you understand what a request and what a response is, and the more that you can bring on development team to actually fully understand how those work, and on a core level, the rest of the stuff's just kind of gravy after that.
I did make so several years ago, when we first built the website on Demandware, the Demandware architects came on site and we worked directly with them. It was a very big project. It was important right before Salesforce and stuff. So it was a really big deal, and they taught us a lot of stuff. But one of the things we got out of that was I have a killer Postman collection, with 75. My personal one's got 150, but the distilled down one has 75. And I one time met with the product, I think it was Jim Lynch at the time. I don't know who it is now, but he was the director of product, and he was over at Cappy. And I met with a few of their guys, and they were like, "Oh, you have a Postman?" So I provided them the Commerce Cloud Postman, but something like that. Now that the Okapi Explorer is out there, and even though it's a little bit challenging to use, stuff like that allows guys to conceptualize the way that it works, guys and girls to conceptualize the way it works. And it's not as hard as you think. It's really not.
You actually reminded me that I loved when Postman in this year released the kind of that flow feature. It's called flow feature, where you can have your copy collection and then you actually can build the journeys. And I was like, wow, that's exactly what I wanted. Because usually you can have multiple APIs, but it's just a bunch of APIs, and I want to build a journey. For example, with a copy, place in order. it involves in a lot of execution of different APIs. And if it's a new person comes to the ecosystem, he's like, okay, I have like 10 different APIs, what I'm doing with them, how, in which order I have to execute them, how I have to pass, can I see the sample? So if you have Postman collection, this is your knowledge. Like, you can go to documentation, but I don't know how about you guys, but documentation don't really help me much. It helps me when I have to implement something. I already know the field and I just want to clarify some particular attributes, maybe some particular stuff, but it's not a place where I can learn about something new stuff. So if I don't know a copy, I go to documentation, I will not learn it. I'm sorry, but that's not the place. And Postman could be like really that place where you have this collection, you have CC, and then you have those journeys. And you're like, okay, I'm a new customer. How the journey comes when I'm a new customer, when I reach the website, when I browse the products, when I add them to the cart, then I'm making the login. Then how the basket is transferred from the guest to the new one. How then I fill out the shipping address, billing, my payment information, and then how the order is placed. Like, kind of those journeys is one, I would say, the best ways to visualize how you can reuse the APIs and how you can do them. So Matt, here I actually have a question in terms of the teams. How do you educate your teams? How do you educate new team members who, for example, could be React guys coming to build your apps, but they don't know Commerce Cloud. They don't know concepts of Commerce Cloud. They don't know copy APIs. Like, what you do, how you onboard them.
Actually, you basically hit on it. The front end engineers, right? A lot of it is the way we write our tickets, of course, and our designs. And if you've got a nice design, you have the basic blocking and tackling. But providing the Postman collection to engineers that are great at React Native has unlocked them. It allowed our best engineers to focus on what they're best at, the front end, putting the UI and the experience and the interactions, first and top of mind, and the performance top of mind, and worrying less about where we're passing the data. And so what we have done is we made the mobile app a container only. You focus on the UI, you make a call whenever there's input from the customer. Commerce Cloud gives you back all the logic. We do all the promotion calculations, we do all the tax, we provide everything, even a lot of the messages and even HTML in some cases when we need to render something very specific, like a message or something like that, that's got to be formatted where a business customer needs to format it. Although I will say we've solved that problem natively too, but I'll tell you that secret on another podcast. So long story short is, though, that Postman collection with journeys, we have been building it over the years. And so we have variables for all of our promotions that are important, or all of our logins that are like our QA logins, or we have our payment methods. So when you do a get bag, it gets your payment method that needs to be removed whenever you place an order. And then we automatically populate the order. And so even though we haven't built out our journeys to be automatic, because that's a relatively new feature, we did use collection runners for basic ones before. But the Okapi Postman collection has been very handy. And I will tell you, just one really good nugget for your listeners. The hardest thing that we had to do when we implemented a fully native checkout solution on mobile app was figure out how to place an order. Because there's one little trick that'll make you crazy that is not well documented or at least not explicitly in Okapi. And so here's what it is. A basket payment instrument is different from an order payment instrument. They have different IDs, and even though they look the same, and when you view them and when you change a basket from a basket to an order, they change. And then in order to authorize the payment, you have to take that payment method, and this is where it gets very technically tricky on the on the compliance piece, is you have to delete that payment instrument and put it back again with a CVV in order for the card to get charged. And let me tell you, it took us forever to figure out that you couldn't patch the bag, that you had to delete it and re-put it and figure out a way to intelligently handle that transaction from the customer perspective, because we didn't want them to have to press two buttons or whatever. So when they entered the CVV, we put the CVV very last. That way we do all of those three transactions in one, and the customer gets a really nice place order experience. And actually, it worked out very well for the UI because customers like just entering the CVV by itself. It just kind of pops up in a mini modal, boop, 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 place order. And we're closer to that one-click checkout that I've been dreaming about forever.
Nice. So coming back, well, sorry, not even coming back, but actually moving forward with this compliance topic and security. So when would you then use WebView vs native experience for this kind of stuff?
Anytime you have PCI data. And you know what? My security rule is this: don't store anything, ever. Don't store anything. Just don't store anything. Okay, that's just the rule, guys. Don't store anything. Token, maybe, if you got a great tokenization provider, and if you don't have tokenization, don't even talk to me. Okay, just don't even talk to me.
So when customers making the login into a web app, you don't save they have like information, you always pull it from the system.
We save it as the payment instrument. We save it on their profile, and then we just pull the ID. Don't grab why grab the card number? Just use an ID. So we just save it to their profile, and then now guest is different, but guest you never have to store it, because guest kind of goes through the process, and once their session is over, it's gone, right? So you don't have to worry about it, or at least the end users don't have to worry about it. But yeah, we just save it on their profile, and then they use the ID. So now it's tricky. You have to convert the JWT, right, so that to a cookie. But once you convert that JWT to a cookie, and I think I've logged one bug in Commerce Cloud that I could convince the support team was a bug, and it's on the roadmap. Someday it's going to get fixed. There are some issues with session where the session cookie is a little bit wonky, the way that it's kept as DW anonymous or DW, I forgot what it's called, DWSID. But outside of that, you just simply take the customer's token, change it to a cookie, open up the WebView. If it reloads, re-add the cookie. That's the one big trick, is the front end has to persist the cookies no matter what the reloading is. But once you do that, you can switch between Okapi and web freely. And so initially we had a WebView checkout, and we just simply did that. And that was pretty common. But I got to be honest, as a technologist, when I came into Belk 7 years ago and I saw they had WebView checkout, I nearly died. I was like, what is this? This must be a joke. And then I found out that it was very common. And I was pissed. I was like, what in the world is this? So when I took over the mobile app about a year in, I told my leaders, and I luckily had the best support in the world, to be honest with you. Our leaders, I don't know exactly why they believed in me with this Mohawk, but they did. And I told them, I said, we got to build a fully native checkout. And they told me, like you did, Oleg, they said, what's the difference? Why do I care? And I said, look, it's hard for me to explain the difference, but it's about the speed, and it's about being able to tap, tap, tap continuously in a flow and make a slippery slope to checkout. Just like Amazon created 3-click checkout a billion years ago, right before most of us even were like in programming. Same kind of thing. You got to make it a slippery slope for them. If it's not slippery, it's not easy. Your older customers, your unsophisticated customers, whatever, are going to have trouble. So anyway, point is that I told them, I said, let's make it fully native. We can keep things such that the customer is flowing right through. And we started building out the Okapis, and it took a long time. I'm going to be honest with you. It was not a super easy thing. I fixed 112 tickets in a release myself, and I was up all night every night. It was not the easiest thing in the world, but I learned a lot. And what we figured out is that the day, no shit, man, the day we launched native checkout, we saw a 4 basis point increase in conversion from mobile web. And now I can't even tell you how big it is. It's like almost double mobile web.
Wow.
Did I blow your mind? Speechless with that?
Yeah, you actually did. I personally, to be very honest, I was not, let's say, I'd never delivered myself the full mobile experience, like native experience. I did like some headless one. I supported some of the teams that actually were going with mobile experience. They had some, let's say, obstacles with Okapi they wanted to solve, like the one with login, but I never seen, like very success story, as you said, right? Because I wasn't part of those success stories.
Yeah.
When you actually do such kind of a job and then you have such huge success where you can go, right? And then you can, after years,
well,
right,
and the people that have success don't necessarily talk about it either, And I always feel bad for the Okapi team, because I feel like they built this stuff 5 years ago, and they get, people give them a hard time, and I probably give them a hard time too. but they thought through this 5 years ago. And I don't know if they were thinking about mobile app or what they were thinking about, but they thought through it years and years ago. And I feel like retailers are just starting to catch up and start to realize that these customers want it. And PWA is actually enabling that conversation, because PWA a lot of times needs a great service. So, both of those things run together. But yeah, anyway, so the checkout piece is the important piece, though. That's the part that I think. It's funny that retailers use mobile web inside of app, and I think it's should be the opposite. Like the checkout should be native, not the browse.
What are unique experiences that you give into your customers on the, let's say, checkout journey? Like, is there anything specific?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, curbside, some subscriptions, other stuff?
Okay, let's talk about them all. There's a ton. We have order subscription. We have pre-sale, which allows you to pre-sale things. We have gifts, so you can pick gifts if you not just buy one, get one free, but buy one, pay for another. We have curbside pickup with a really great partner that does McDonald's and Chipotle. They were killer. I love them. They're the best vendor we've ever had, to be honest with you. So we have a full curbside pickup where when you land in the store, it literally tells the team to bring things out, which is awesome, much better than like calling in and trying to wait for somebody to bring something out. We've got our checkout. What's unique about it, and this is actually kind of a Commerce Cloud, maturity question. Again, it can be handled, I think, with PWA in some ways, but defaulting all the payment instruments, defaulting all of the customers' information, so that if they're using a very common checkout, they can just press place order. Right? It doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but every time you refresh the web, right, you lose a lot of information, and it takes a lot of diligence to make sure that all of that stays across the browser steps. And so our web experience is more segmented. It's like, enter your payment, okay, next. Enter your billing information, okay, next. Pick a shipping method or whatever. Whereas on app, it's more all on one page, right? It's all pre-defaulted. I press place order, type in my CVV, and done. Now, that has a lot to do with architecture choices and design choices, but if you make those design choices ahead of time, and again, to your point about headless, if you got a great service, you can do all of that. But if you try to do it all in the session with ISML, you're going to end up being segmented over and over and dealing with the stupid back button. That back button, to Peter's point, causes many, many pains.
Okay. I have personally in my end just last one question. And then Peter, if you will still have few, let's go with them. If not, I guess we can leave Matt with a message to the community. What do you think?
I have a question for Matt.
Okay, go ahead.
He mentioned it beforehand, but for anyone watching this video, I want to know the story about the lemonade apron that's on your wall in the background.
I'm so glad you asked.
It's like you should get the opportunity to say what that is.
I'm so glad. Not my wife's 2 diplomas and my tiny little one.
I can't see that, but I see that. Good. It looks like lemonade automatically, and it looks like a dollhouse or something over your shoulder. Yeah.
My wife is an amazing person, and I'm always giving her a hard time with her diplomas and my tiny little one. Anyway, this little guy right here is something really important to me. My mom made it for me. It is my the very first entrepreneurial journey I ever had, and it's a lemonade stand that my brother and I started in California. I was 9 years old. And my mom, I don't know why, but she kept the smock in the book. And so that is actually the smock that says sole proprietor on it with my brother and my name on it, and a picture of us sitting at our lemonade stand. And it's important to me because the entrepreneurial journey has defined my life in a lot of ways. I've had a couple startups. I'm in the middle of starting a startup. Around a lot of the things we're talking about here. And it actually defined the way that I approach mobile app. And if you hear me be passionate about it, or if you've heard me on any podcast and I get all worked up and I'm sweating like crazy because it's important to me, and I put every energy I have into owning that. And that directly comes from my experiences as an entrepreneur. And the way I got people on board at Belk or at other places where I've worked around these kind of things is partially with passion and getting all worked up and never giving up, but also by putting my full force into it and talking to everybody and getting out there in the community and making my case, right, kind of uphill battle against all of the headwinds that are out there with alternatives. But it's been very successful, and I'm very thankful for my parents who have always supported everything that we've done, and all the people that my boss at Belk and the bosses at Belk and my product owners and all those people that really believed in what we were doing, because it did take an enormous amount of effort to pull these things off. It didn't come overnight. But all of that has to do with just a lot of grit that you learn when you're an entrepreneur. So,
yeah, that's amazing. I know you've earned the title champion. I know that's one that comes on the entrepreneurs. You have to be the champion of what you're working on. To be pushing it out there.
The beaten up champion, though. Yeah, you feel beat up sometimes.
Yes, you do. Yeah, you got to be a little bit crazy to be an entrepreneur. So that's why it makes it all work.
Thanks for asking that, though.
Yeah, no problem, man. Yeah, that was all I had. I felt like that needed to be talked about. So,
thank you, Peter. I think the question that I had will ruin the mood that we have right now. So I will just park it, as Matt mentioned earlier in the podcast, for another podcast we may have this year. So I hope Matt will chat after to see and plan something as well. And usually, so like in all our podcasts, in the end, we have a part which is called message to the community. It's usually when our guests have their time, when they can, it's not a question answer. It's like your time. And when you want to say anything to the community, it's this time, right? Where you can speak to them. So here you go, Matt. This is your message to community time.
Well, I'm going to utilize this time to just make a personal message, because one thing that is very important to me is building people, and that's what it comes down to. I mentioned the startup that I started. It's called Build It, and one of the things why we named it Build It is it's about building people. And so I just want to say to all you Salesforce people out there working really hard, COVID has, sure, it's tripled our revenue, but it's tripled our work too. And a lot of us have been working remotely most of our life, but now everybody's working remotely, and a lot of them are discovering, the challenges of being isolated. Some of the good things too, like less interruptions, but also more meetings. But last year was very challenging for me. Lots of stress. Obviously, doing all the app work and other things has been a big part of that. But also the change. And I just want to encourage everybody to spend time with your families, make your kids number one. We're selling clothes, we're selling stuff, and it's important to make people's lives a little bit better, but you got to keep your family's lives better too. And the people and the employees that you work with, or the people below you or above you, just take the time to support your team, and to take care of your family and to spend time with them, and just keep it in context. We're selling stuff, and it's great. It's important. And I love it, but your family's more important than that. So
thank you, Matt, for this. Now I feel that when we finish this podcast for after party, I will not stay for the long time. I will go to my family, to my wife and my kid, and just spend time with them, because it's a Saturday. For me, it's a morning time. They just woke up. So thank you. I mean, I'm with you. Yeah, job is one thing. We're trying to do good stuff, but family is something we should never forget and put in the first place.
Sure.
Great. Thank you very much for today, everyone, for being with us. So it was an official podcast. Today we spoke about mobile apps on Commerce Cloud. Together with me, I had my great guy who actually, we had actually a chat before the ending, right? So we were chatting with Peter, and he was saying okay, we did a great job, right? But sometimes I don't know. We were actually just discussing the feedback from other folks that were telling us what we're doing good, what we're doing maybe not that good with the podcast, right? And I was saying to Peter that I cannot imagine this podcast without him, right? I mean, I cannot actually imagine that I would get so far. When I came with the idea, Peter was my first guest, and then we actually discussed that we are going to run it together. Matt, right now, I cannot imagine I would get there. We would actually get with this podcast over here. And Peter was like, "Oh, I can, I think you can do it yourself." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? I think you actually can do this podcast without me. I cannot run it without you." So yeah, together together today on the podcast, we had Peter Schmalfeldt, and I want to thank you a lot, Peter, for doing a great job.
Thank you. What most people don't know is I'm just a figment of your imagination, Oleg. This is some Fight Club stuff, and this is actually all you. Yeah.
Beta of metaverse from Meta, right? Like the first avatar.
Peter, are you in the metaverse?
Slightly crazy.
He's in the metaverse.
Okay. Sorry for that, but yeah. So my name is Oleg. This is Peter, Matt, and it was Unofficial Podcast. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time.